To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meyer Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meyer Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us. Hi, everyone. Kristen Sinatra-Walker here, and we are doing another show on the...
What is better healthcare? It's your medical team having your complete medical history at their fingertips and being able to communicate instantly and securely. When waiting for faxes and phone calls is a thing of the past, because reports and medical images are available at the touch of a button. Choosing a partner that provides these tools for free saves time, reduces costs, and provides better care. We are the Hudson Valley's Health Information Exchange, HealthLink New York, now powered by Healthy Connections.
Clinical Christian podcast with Dr. Lisa Day. Lisa, I'm so glad we're back today.
Good morning.
It makes my week when I know that I get to look forward to doing a show with you.
Oh, I appreciate that. They're so fun. So fun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today's topic is forgiveness and mental health, the true freedom. And I love that. And just if any of you listeners that are, this is your first time listening, Lisa Day is a registered nurse and she has her PhD in psychology. So we got a double threat, quote unquote, here, actually double the help.
Several perspectives, right?
Exactly. Different perspectives, which is really incredible. Plus, she's just a vivacious person. I'm talking about you like you're in the third person. But tell our listeners why this topic was important for you, the topic of forgiveness and how it affects our mental health.
Absolutely. When I look at forgiveness, it affects us both psychologically and physically. But psychologically, what I find is that to the extent that we have not forgiven somebody or something for their transgressions against us, for their hurts, for their violations, it's my opinion that we walk hand in hand with that person or with that injury, meaning it affects every part of our present time. So if we have been verbally abused as a child and we've not forgiven either that theme or that injury of verbal abuse, we walk hand in hand through life. We relate to other people and we relate to this thing we call life as if that injury were in our lap. So psychologically, to the extent that we don't forgive and we choose not to forgive, we stay stuck in our past. We actually create an identity around our pain that's reborn and we continue to suffer.
So is that similar to we keep maybe attracting or finding people in our lives that bring up and mirror that wound to us because we are supposed to keep working towards, that forgiveness piece. So they show up in different people that show up in your life?
Well, absolutely. And sometimes the way that, you've heard that referred to in pop psychology is that we find ourselves trying to fix what went wrong in our childhood. Right. So we find ourselves with an emotionally unavailable person and try to get them to love us in an effort to prove that we're lovable. And we repeat these patterns, of the injury without even intending to, for sure. And the bigger problem, or as big of a problem, I guess, would be that to the extent that we don't forgive, our heart becomes consumed with bitterness and resentment. And with bitterness and resentment, the way that I like to think about it is it clogs our pipes. So if we think about, pipes coming in and pipes coming out of our heart, I say to the extent that we have not forgiven, to the extent that we have bitterness and resentment, not only does it interfere with our ability to receive love, but unfortunately, it directly affects our ability to give love, to give that unconditional love.
And, there are many people that whether it be they were abused by a parent or they associate that father figure that was abusive to them, and then they become angry even with God because they associate father with God. And getting to that place of forgiveness in that area is something that people talk about a lot. So what do you say about that? I know that's its own whole show, but what are your thoughts on that piece?
Well, and it affects in many ways. So, one example, if the injury comes from your father here on earth, if he molested you, was hypercritical throughout your life, was verbally or physically abusive, that's transferred for many people to their relationship with God. That if my father on earth did this, how can I trust my father in heaven?
Right.
But another dynamic that happens is that if there's a God out there, why did he let me get molested from the age of 12 through 14 and no one helped me? Where was he? What was going on? And so there's this bitterness and resentment that, that it works for everybody else in the world, but I have to hold on to this anger, because if I don't hold on to this anger, then it could happen again. Meaning lots of folks hold on to anger to create space and distance from the offense. They're afraid if they're no longer angry that it will happen again. And what we'll talk about, in the actual process of forgiveness is it's through the development of boundaries that we're able to hold that space, rather than using the anger, bitterness, and resentment to hold that space. Because the sad thing is that, with forgiveness is it's for the person who's doing it. Meaning, I say the only person engaged in the process of forgiveness is the one withholding it. And so we do it for ourselves, and yet many times we do it to hold space from that which we think is going to injure us.
That's fascinating. And there's so much around people that word forgiveness that it can actually be very triggering for people. It's batted around. I think sometimes it's been used in ways that haven't been healthy for people, that haven't helped them get to a place of forgiveness, because it's almost as if it's you're not as godly of a person, as one example, if you don't forgive. And what's missing there, from what I've seen, is or felt, is a lack of understanding about what forgiveness actually is.
Absolutely. Years ago I came across a quote, and let me see if I can quote it accurately. And it goes something like this: to forgive is to set a prisoner free, only to discover that prisoner was you. So to forgive is to set a prisoner free, only to discover that prisoner was you. Meaning, it's powerful, isn't it? Meaning unforgiveness, we are the ones who suffer. Hence, when I said psychologically, to the extent that we don't forgive, we continue to walk through life hand in hand with that injury. And we don't think of it. We think that was horrible. That person was horrible. I'll never talk to them again. I'm not going to think about that abuse. I'm not going to think about that memory. We hold on to anger as a means to move forward, when in fact, it just keeps it alive. And the other things, you say, why the topic of forgiveness? One of the things that we know, as therapists, is that repressed anger is one of the main causes of depression. Right. The bitterness, the resentment, repressed anger or undealt with anger, it can make your anxiety worse. It can contribute to, an assortment of other mental health issues. It can cause substance use and abuse. It interferes with attachment. So psychologically, not forgiving is horrifically destructive. But physically, Nurse Lisa is going to jump in here. And, I often talk about cortisol, but, research shows us that repressed anger, unresolved, lack of forgiveness is actually associated with coronary heart disease. And not to go too far off on the corticosteroids and the catecholamines, but it actually, repressed anger, because of the effect that it has on our cortisol, causes us to develop coronary heart disease. The other thing it does is it's associated with a poorer outcome with other, regular diseases, whatever regular disease is, but other disease processes heal more slowly. And then we found that it's associated with type 2 diabetes. So here you have lack of forgiveness as a mother who abandoned you when you were 5, only to find that as an adult you get type 2 diabetes. I mean, what kind of trick is that? So, psychologically and physically, not forgiving is incredibly destructive, to our systems.
How does someone know if they are a lot of things that we talk about, especially with Dr. Meyer on the shows that we do with him, we talk about, so many people live out of their unconscious. And so many people, I think, maybe they believe that they've forgiven because they've said, well, I forgive that person, but that's not actually true. So as a clinician, when you're working with someone and they say, oh, I've forgiven, and that there's some stuff there that needs to be dug up and worked on, that's
And
not
that's
really true. How do you know? Because, we can fool ourselves like nobody's business.
well, and not even fool ourselves, so whether it's a Christian walk or a secular walk, if we value the concept of forgiveness, sometimes people forgive prematurely. Meaning they say, whatever, I'm over it, I forgive them. They're doing it in an effort not to hurt. Follow me? But actually, it's a sophisticated form of denial. So I forgive you, let's move forward is, a premature forgiveness, a form of denial. But to track that back to your question, Kristen, how do you know, is it shows up and we get provoked. So we might either shut down, we might not be available for attachment. We might have difficulties with trust, respect. We might struggle with self-esteem, self-value. We might have tremendous fears of abandonment and rejection. So when there's lack of forgiveness, even though intellectually we might have decided that we have forgiven, where we see it is it shows up in our, what I call our operating systems in relationships of how and in what way do we connect and attach to other people, and how and in what way do we experience nurturing. If we've not forgiven, it absolutely negatively affects both of those things, how we attach, how we nurture, and how we receive nurturing.
Yeah, and the word attach, for whatever reason, that's making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There are so many things around unhealthy attachments. Explain a little bit more about, what an unhealthy, in relation to a lack of forgiveness, what that can mean in terms of an attachment being unhealthy for someone, or many unhealthy attachments.
Oh, absolutely. So, a healthy attachment is that, referring back to boundaries, I can be me without losing you. An unhealthy attachment, there's a variety. We can have, an unavailability for attachment, or we can have, a nervous or an anxious attachment, and we can, that's on a bell-shaped curve. There's some varieties in between. But an unhealthy attachment, we may be so fearful of abandonment or rejection that we disregard our needs and wants. We shut down and we give our power away to the other person. Situations like that often are common when an individual has suffered childhood abuse or childhood injuries, that they're so fearful, we are so fearful of abandonment, of rejection, that we make okay things that are not okay at all. So, an anxious attachment is one where we're fearful of rejection, we're fearful of abandonment, and it's associated with us disregarding our needs and wants. It's also associated with us giving people qualities that they don't have and disregarding qualities that they do.
So, okay, giving people qualities that they don't have. Let's unpack that. Give some examples of what that can look like.
Giving people qualities they don't have is usually we're giving them qualities that we need them to have, but that they may not necessarily possess. So we may need them to be kind, considerate, and loving, when in fact they're self-absorbed and disregarding. And when they are self-absorbed and disregarding, we make excuses for them. We say they're working too hard, they have the flu, they are distracted by their issues with their extended family. We give them qualities, they don't demonstrate them at all. And when we're faced with the reality that they don't demonstrate them, we make excuses for them. And so when we do that, that combination of giving people qualities that they don't have and disregarding qualities that they do, meaning, so if we are someone who doesn't value rage, unkind words, being judged, criticized, and treated poorly, when they do that, so they rage on us, or they curse at us, or they reject us, or abandon us, once again, we give them excuses. We say they're stressed, they don't feel well, it was a long day, they have a low blood sugar. We function in denial. And so when we have, unresolved forgiveness, we find ourselves, in a lot of uncomfortable and unhealthy relationship dynamics.
I find that so interesting, and I've experienced that, and I've witnessed it myself, where um, the need to be right, uh, and that's also another unhealthy attachment. The attachment to being right seems to me steeped in unforgiveness, or can be, because I've seen people who are with a partner, let's say, who is absolutely doing atrocious things to them, just not at all what they were told, how they were told they were going to behave in the relationship. And yet the person side by side them in it will defend that atrocious behavior, defend that person behaving not at all the way that they promised, and they will defend them against the people that actually love them. So they will be angry with and put down and ignore the people that do love them in order to defend the person who is abusing them, hanging on to not wanting to be wrong because
Well,
that unhealthy attachment.
and not wanting to lose what they perceive or describe as love. Follow
Yes.
me? Yeah. And
Yes.
so if we haven't forgiven and we haven't learned about, healthy love, healthy connection, healthy attachment, what we define as love, it can be very convoluted. So if we grew up in a chaotic home with alcoholism, with abuse, sexual, verbal, physical, where it's very chaotic, as adults, we grow up thinking that chaos is love.
Right.
I talk about two kinds of attachment. I talk about intimate attachments and intense attachments. And this is a little bit of a segue from forgiveness, but I think it's valuable here. And that in an intimate attachment, those are described or characterized by mutual respect, trust, honesty, holding space for our loved ones. They're calm. When we're in an intimate relationship, we are bringing out the best in our other, and they are bringing out the best in us. Conversely, an intense relationship is one that's described by chaos and drama, judgment and criticism, power and control. And those dynamics are all dynamics that we see when one has not worked through or embraces a process as a life dynamic, the process of forgiveness. We see these intense connections and attachments rather than these genuinely intimate connections and attachments.
Oh, that's fascinating. So I had a friend that would constantly have these love affairs and brag about how they were so intense, and none of them ever lasted. They were always, fly to the ends of the earth to be with this person and beg and plead. And they even, got on their knees in front of me one time and, said, "I'm here for you. Why don't you love me the way I love you?" And I looked at them and I was like, "What are you to get off your knee? Like, this has nothing to do with me. I am not in any way flattered. This is your stuff."
Well, and it may be their attempt to heal from an injury that they've not healed, right? They're trying to fix it in their adult life. Yeah. Yeah. And so, when we look at, they kind of track us back. So what is forgiveness, right? If we find ourselves in these unhealthy attachments, or if we find ourselves in these intense attachments, whether they're anxious or avoidant or the intensity ones that we described, oftentimes we're going to be able to track them back to trying to fix what went wrong in our childhood, or real injuries, real bitterness and resentment. So when we don't forgive, it affects our operating system in almost every aspect. We bring that into every relationship. And so when you look at that, the question would then be, what is forgiveness, right? And so,
Right.
I tell people always that, I'm dating myself here, but did you ever watch I Dream of Jeannie? Jeannie used to cross her arms, right, and tilt her head and blink. It was done. And I tell folks, that is not the kind of forgiveness that I'm talking about. The kind of forgiveness that is so very helpful in our growth as an individual. It's a process. It's not an act. It's an intentional, mindful process that we're moving toward healing the emotions. We want to change our feelings, change our attitudes. And this is the most important part. We intentionally want to process, grow from suffering to freedom. And it's not with a denial. It's not, I forgive you, I move forward. It actually is an active process where we are going to intentionally work on our thoughts, our attitudes, our beliefs, so that we don't suffer. I tell people, and this is going to sound more callous than I intend, but one can be raped. That rapist more than likelihood is going to go on and do it again and not give you a second thought. Follow me? But if we
Right.
spend the rest of our life hoping that his hair falls out and he goes blind, we are the ones whose hearts are contaminated with that hate, that anger, that bitterness, the resentment. And moving forward with that, one of the things that we absolutely want to clarify with forgiveness is really what forgiveness is not. And it's really important to know that forgiveness
Let's
is
get
not.
into that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not to pardon, it's not to excuse, and it's not to explain the hurt, the injury. It doesn't mean we need to invite them over for Thanksgiving. Oftentimes, it's not even going to involve the person who hurt us. Forgiveness is for us. It's not, to let the offender off the hook, if you will, or to allow the injury to repeat itself. It's not saying that what you did was okay.
I thought about this too because I thought I really needed to forgive someone who sexually harassed me in an office that I was sharing space with this person, and then denied it and punished me for speaking out about it, and so did their staff. And that was so painful. It happened in my 40s, and I did start the process of forgiving him for me, but that never meant, and luckily I have the benefit of being around a lot of therapists and having my own therapist, but it never meant that when all of the things that have come up about, let's say, Harvey Weinstein as an example, those things came up and I still went back to that place and I still had anger, and I had some anger boil up towards him because, I never got an apology. I never will. There will never be an acknowledgement. And I still was able to go, I still forgive him, but I'm still allowed to be angry that happened. And I'm still allowed to be upset that I won't ever get that apology. But I don't feel hatred towards him anymore. And that's when I realized that's what the freedom is. And people think, oh, it just means that you never feel upset about what happened. Well, that is simply not true. So what do you think about that?
Oh, you couldn't be more spot on. That's where we come back and we say that forgiveness is a process. And much like grieving, it's something that we practice. And with the bigger injuries, anybody who's been sexually abused, sexually harassed, physically abused, criticized throughout their entire life, you are going to find things, and we'll talk a little bit about PTSD in a moment, but you are going to find that things provoke that. And the beautiful thing about forgiveness, and certainly with a 5-step process that we'll talk about as well, is that we can go back to it. So I liken it to a physical fitness. If we want to keep our aerobic capacity strong, we need to walk or have aerobic exercise on a regular basis.
Right.
The beautiful thing about forgiveness is once we begin to integrate the process of forgiveness, what fuels it is our freedom, the relief that we feel in our heart. But it's not that it's done. This life has no shortage of what I say opportunities to grow. And those are opportunities to revisit.
Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meyer of the Meyer Clinics. Our Christian counselors across the country have a goal of helping all those who come to us to become what God has called them to be. If you're in a situation where you're not at peace within yourself, or you just feel like there's joy that's missing in your life, we can come alongside to help you obtain peace and joy.
This message is sponsored by the Meyer Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
So I had a client who unfortunately was sexually abused in a gray van with butterflies on it. And, she worked a process of forgiveness, and she truly is free from the hate, the anger, the bitterness, and the resentment. But I assure you, when she sees butterflies and when she sees a gray van, I don't think she sees that combination anymore. It absolutely takes her back to the young girl that she was, right, and the severity of the sexual abuse that took place. But she's then able to move through this process and release him, not end with hateful thoughts, wishing that he would die, that his knees would, get blasted out, or that she could get revenge, because only that, that would only pollute her own heart. We talk about, the freedom that you talk about. I say that you will know that you have truly and fully forgiven someone or something when you can face that image without an emotional charge.
Right.
You can feel it, but it doesn't hit you in the chest and knock you down.
Doesn't lay you out for days. It used to, even just looking at this guy's website or someone sending me an email and talking about them would literally, I would have to sleep for a few days and just really, and that was all part of the process of healing as well. But yeah, I did get to a point where now I'm like, whatever, I'm sure he's creating nonsense with other people, and that I'm sorry for whoever are receiving that, or maybe he's evolved, who knows, but it doesn't flatten me at all. I just get a little ugh and then move on. But yeah, that's a huge indicator that you're not okay. I need to crawl in bed for 3 days still.
Well, and the important part, and though we're not speaking directly to this today, is that generally speaking, if we are working a process of forgiveness of that type, we're doing a parallel process, and we're working a forgiveness and grieving process. And that's worth a word here too, because it's my belief, and sometimes we can work through these as a parallel process, but if we are not grieving and forgiving, it complicates, the emotional response. And some folks will go so far as to say that you can't forgive until you have grieved. Oftentimes we do them parallel, but it is a process. And so my definition, or the best definition I've come across with grieving, is the ability to integrate profound sadness into who we are and how we operate. And that does overflow into forgiveness. So if I am a victim of sexual abuse and something reminds me of it, it's not, woohoo, I've forgiven you and this is cool. It's, that's sad. That's a sad part of my past. And yet I'm not going to harbor anger and resentment and bitterness, which further abuses me and prevents me from experiencing the life I want. I forgive so that I have the freedom to grow.
Right. Well, let's talk about the 5 steps, because people just don't even know where to begin when it comes to forgiveness. And there's a lot of information out there. So having benchmarks that they can look at, or stages, is very, very helpful.
Absolutely. So to put it in perspective, I use an analogy. And the analogy I use is that if we were to head home from work this afternoon and jump on the freeway, and heaven forbid, a truck driver of an 18-wheeler had been drinking. So a drunk driver reams into the back of our car and blows out our lumbar spine. Okay, so we get a lower back injury. While we are not responsible for that car accident, the driver was impaired, he was speeding, and he wrecked into us. We're not responsible for the injury, but we certainly are going to be responsible for the healing. And that's how I look at, and that's how I invite us to enter into the forgiveness process, that we are not responsible for the injury. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but only we can take responsibility for the healing. So when I look at the process of forgiveness, and again, emphasizing the process, I look at 5, again, knowing at some level this goes hand in hand with grieving, but the very first step is to identify the injury. And when I say identify the injury, sometimes it's a single event, or it could be a theme of events. So a single event could be, being rejected by our social club, forgetting a birthday, being raped, being rejected, being abandoned, a single episode, of infidelity from a spouse. These would be a single event that we would need to identify as the injury. But other times it's a theme of injury, or a theme of events. That might be mother's rage, might be father's abandonment of the family. It could be an emotional abandonment from other family members, bullying by neighbors. It could be a history of a family member's rage and control, addictions in the home. So we want to look at what is the injury? And the reason we do this is because, as we were talking about, while we can work through the process of forgiveness, we're going to have lots of opportunities in life to be reminded of it. And to the extent that we can go, oh, that's a Dalmatian puppy, it will help us then to move through the rest of the forgiveness process. So it's, oh, that's my abandonment, or, oh, that's my violation, or, and sometimes we don't want to say why. We would say, oh, that's the abuse, or that's the emotional abandonment, or we might just say injury. But the first step is we want to identify what the injury is. The next step, which is oftentimes quite difficult, is identifying who's responsible for the injury. Meaning, oftentimes when one is a victim of abuse, regardless of what the abuse is, be it verbal, emotional, sexual, physical, oftentimes victims believe that they're responsible for it.
Yes.
Why didn't I say something? Yeah, if I were a better girl, why didn't I tell anybody? Why didn't I get myself out of the situation? I shouldn't have made him mad. I shouldn't have disappointed her. So the second step of the forgiveness process is to identify who's responsible, for the injury. I tell people, and this is kind of an odd way of saying it, but it's profound for me. You can tell me if it works for you. But I say we have to be very careful that we're not taking responsibility for the sins committed against us when someone injures us.
Yeah.
I tell people that
that's a big one.
it is a big one. Well, and I tell people, a pedophile is a pedophile. A 37-year-old man does not have a romantic love for a 14-year-old girl.
Right.
And a 14-year-old girl can come into my office at 25 and say, my first love was this 40-year-old man. And I say, at what age were you? And she says, 14. And that's not love. That's sexual abuse. But
Right.
for many folks, they'll hide that. They believe that they loved the person. They believe that they were responsible for engaging in really as a violation against themselves. So the second step often is very difficult, identifying who's responsible for that injury. The other part of that, Kristen, which is interesting and not many people think about, is that sometimes when we're working a process of forgiveness and we're looking at what is the injury and who's responsible, sometimes it's that we have a parent with terminal cancer.
Right.
And the injury is that the cancer prohibits her from getting out of bed, from mothering us, from holding us, from loving us. Our life becomes, characterized by trips to the hospital and fears of death. And the family members don't think of it as, I need to forgive my mother for her cancer. But that cancer has an injurious effect on the development. And so these can be very complicated forgiveness processes. And the injury would be emotional unavailability due to mom's cancer, and then we would proceed through the rest of the forgiveness process. But it's a really complicated forgiveness process.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, thank goodness they can do this in this, the space of a counseling office, as an example, because that kind of thing, let's say it is, a parent's terminal illness, as an example, they're maybe not going to get much support or understanding from society, but they can when they're dealing with a counselor.
Absolutely. And the safety, and the confines, which is a big part of the forgiveness process. The next step that we would talk about is, bringing this into a safe relationship. And the third step, as I teach it, would be that we identify all of our feelings associated with the injury and being mindful that our feelings can be pretty ugly. And we need to take responsibility for our emotions, not the situation, but we want to honor, the full spectrum of emotions as they relate to the injury. Oftentimes, folks who are a victim of childhood abuse, they feel badly that they weren't a better kid. And the feelings can range from feeling badly that I wasn't a better kid to fury and anger and hatred and wishing death of the person, who injured them. And so, the third step in the forgiveness process is identifying all of our feelings associated with that injury. And so when you look at that, the first three steps, identification of injury, delineating, who was responsible for the injury, and identifying all of our feelings associated with the injury are the looking back part. Those are, what has happened to us. And then in therapy or with a coach or with a trusted other, the real meat and potatoes, if you will, of the forgiveness process are in the fourth and fifth step. And this is wordy, and I'll say it and then we can shorten it if we want. But the fourth step of forgiveness is, I say it this way, is how and in what way has this injury negatively affected who I am and how I operate in relationship to myself, to the world, and to others. So how and in what way has this injury negatively affected me, how I operate in relationship to myself, to the world, and others? Meaning, am I bitter, resentful, angry? Have I become a judgmental and critical person? Am I a fearful person? Do I avoid attachment? Do I have dysfunctional behaviors? Do I avoid adult responsibility? Do I have low self-esteem? Those are some of the negative ones. But then we have these beauties. Some of us might be able to own these. Some of them look good. Am I fiercely independent? Meaning, do I not lean on anybody? Do I have an overactive sense of responsibility? Am I perfectionistic? Am I a workaholic? Am I an overachiever? Do I have difficulty saying no? All of these are just a handful of ways that lack of forgiveness can negatively affect who I am and how I operate in relationship with other people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A few of those hit me too. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And a
we
lot of, we can operate where we don't realize it, or we don't want to look at it, or we don't want to sit with the pain that we really need to actually sit with in order to get to the place where we have the freedom.
And we don't always realize it. I mean, I would tell you, absolutely one of my greatest assets is I'm fiercely independent, and one of my greatest liabilities is I'm fiercely independent. And so if in my early dating years I was let down, and you say, I'm not going to lean on anybody like that again because that hurt, and so I'm going to do it all myself, right? And I'm not going to trust. I'm not going to be vulnerable. And so it has great, areas when you keep your house clean or you can get your oil changed. But, when you start moving coolers or lifting things after the age of 40 and you blow out your lumbar spine, that's from being fiercely independent, So we don't think, I just blew out my lumbar spine. It's just because I haven't forgiven my boyfriend when I was 20 years old. But it does, it's that I'm not going to trust. I'm not going to communicate my needs because I'm afraid of being let down. So we look at in the fourth step is how has it negatively affected us? And then where we engage in the lifelong process, or sometimes not lifelong, but a lifelong process of forgiveness is how and in what ways do I need to grow to decrease that negative effect? So if we come back to the 18-wheeler that rear-ended us and blew out our lumbar spine, do I have to engage in physical therapy, and do I need to do core exercises the rest of my life? Likely yes. So with a forgiveness exercise, in the fifth step, how and in what way do I need to grow to decrease that negative effect? It's how do I come to a place of abandoning, challenging myself to abandon all judgment and criticism of self and others? How do I learn how to discipline my mind from moving into a victim persona and describing myself based on where I've been? I need to grieve. I need to look at acceptance. I learn to take my power back rather than feeling powerlessness over the things that happen to me. A big one in the forgiveness process, a huge component of the forgiveness process, is the development of boundaries. So while I may be powerless over what happened to me, what can I do moving forward that's going to decrease the likelihood that I will be on the receiving end of that moving forward in my life? No guarantees, but what can I do to decrease that likelihood?
Right. And, if we don't deal with this stuff deals with us. We're given lots of opportunities to have, to get these challenges brought in before us to deal with them. Like just even this last couple of weeks, I've had so many opportunities to say no, and I've done it every time, but I've thought, what is going on? Why am I just there's so much stuff coming up that of course I'm going to say no to. And I was really criticizing myself for that. And then I turned around and went, oh, okay, it's because your life is showing up to let you know that you've got some boundary work to do, and good for you that you're saying no. Why don't you pat yourself on the back instead of, thinking that there's something going wrong here? Because for me, saying no, my boundaries there weren't any when I was a kid. There weren't any. I did not learn that. So every time I get an opportunity to strengthen that, that's a good thing. It's a good sign. It's not something to critique myself over.
No, and that's a great point. So if as a child there wasn't room for us to say no, that would have a negative effect on us as an adult. And then the growth challenge would be challenging ourselves to say no as often as we say yes.
Exactly.
So that we're able to change it. I say to folks that, forgiveness certainly doesn't change our past, but it definitely enlarges our future. Right. And it brings the power, back into our hands of dictating, what we're going to do and not do. And so, when we work through, that forgiveness process, again, emphasizing process of what is the injury, who was responsible for it, how and in what way is it, affected who I am and how I operate, and how and in what way do I need to grow? We gain the power back. We hold the power. But another aspect that sometimes is difficult for people, in fact, I think one of the most difficult forgiveness processes that we come across is forgiveness of self. And most of what we've been talking about here today is, forgiveness of others, if, we've been on the receiving end of abuse. But, what about when, we forget our mother's birthday, or we forget to send a thank you, or we lose our temper, with a family member, or we're fired or lose, a position because of poor work performance? How do we forgive ourselves with, there was an incident when my older daughter, who's 20, when she was 8 years old, and we were at a gathering, and she says, "Mama, I'm afraid of this dog. And I said, well, let's go meet the dog. And, I was always taught you look a dog in the eyes and you don't show fear. And so we walk over to where this dog is. And as I was walking over, it all happened at one point in time. I looked at my daughter and I looked at the dog, which was about a 90-pound pit bull, and it launched toward her face, and it tore off part of her face.
Oh my gosh.
And long story short, she's beautiful. She's healed. She's a lovely, amazing woman, which took about 3 months in and out of hospitals. It was horrible. But I said to her, sweetie, you always look a dog in the eyes. Let's go meet the dog. And here we go over, we meet the dog. It attacks her and pulls off part of her face. So you can imagine, when you look at the forgiveness process, I couldn't even go there. I couldn't even think about her face. I couldn't think about the ICU. I couldn't think about the stitches. I couldn't think about the blood. And then I realized, you know what, Lisa, you have to forgive yourself. You have to go to and toward that, because the shame that you feel about your actions and behaviors is only going to further eat at your self-esteem, on your self-value as you're feeling as a mother. And we have to look at that. I did what I thought was best, and it was wrong. But if I don't forgive myself, then I'm forever a prisoner of my shame that it's overactive sense of responsibility. I bit my daughter's face, and obviously we can laugh that no, I didn't. But as a parent, we think, how could I have done that? And we shame and we shame and we shame. And so, we talk about forgiveness of others, but it's so important and that we really learn how also to forgive ourselves, because without forgiving ourselves, the shame prohibits our growth. It holds us, captive.
Absolutely. It keeps you from doing, your soul's purpose. What are you here to do with your life? And if you carry all those bags of shame around, you're not going to be able to, have the space to go out and do those things. I did that with my son, where, I said, listen, any therapy that you do, which he has done, he's 29. If you need me to come in there and there are things that you need to say to me about, ways that I hurt you and upset you as your parent, go for it. Wow. I will own anything. And he had a lot of anger, and I assumed that it was anger that was all I deserved it. And then I realized later it wasn't that I deserved all that anger. He just got used to mom is always the safe, no matter, I can be angry with mom. Yeah. And exactly. And so as an adult, we turned that around, and I said, listen, I'm not going to be the repository for all of your anger anymore. It was okay when you were 5. It's not okay at 29. So I'm going to take some space from you, and I'm not going to live in shame anymore about my parenting with you, because that doesn't help me. I will own whatever it is you feel like I need to own, but you are not allowed to speak to me in this way or what have you. And we disconnected for a bit. And I'll tell you what, that was a huge act of forgiveness of myself and Absolutely. A big boundary. And we ended up, he called me a few months later and said, I realize I need my mom, and I'm sorry. And, we were okay after that. So forgiveness really looks quite different than what we think it does.
What we think it does. It is so powerful. If I were to think, if there's one, I always talk about operational systems, how we operate in this thing we call life. And I think the most powerful operating system component, the hard drive, if you will, I think it has to be forgiveness, because forgiveness holds us prisoner, it keeps a record of wrongs, and it prevents us from growing. Generally speaking, I'll say fear is the number one prohibitor of growth. But if you think about lack of forgiveness, it's often going to include fear. And, when we learn how to, and when we forgive others and we experience forgiveness of self by others, it's beautiful, right? And it doesn't mean that it's okay. It doesn't mean we necessarily want that person to come over for Thanksgiving, but it means that our pipes aren't clogged with wanting them to die or hating them, wanting them, ill will. It means that there's more room in our heart actually to experience that connection and attachment of love. One of the things that I talk about, and we kind of chuckle, I have clients sometimes walk in my office and they'll say, oh boy, I've had a lot of opportunities to grow this week. And it's that, and I say, this is good. But truly, it's my belief that every torment, every challenge, every loss, every opportunity for forgiveness is really, and it's a gift in that it's an opportunity to grow. I'm not saying for 1 minute that it was a gift that my daughter was attacked by a pit bull,
Right.
but the gift of being able to acknowledge that I'm a flawed human being and there's room to grow. I can guarantee you I don't look pit bulls in the eyes anymore. In fact, I steer clear of them, and I'm a dog lover. But I can, it's an opportunity to grow, to learn that no, pit bulls see it as a challenge, and they will attack you. I never knew that. Here, I grew up with dogs all my life. I thought you're supposed to look them in the eye. Well, I learned you don't. But if we look at it as an opportunity for growth, there's a gift. So many people look at life as a series of problems. When we do that, we miss the gift. When we can look at it, okay, what can I glean from this? Where is my opportunity to grow? How can I come before you? You get in a fight with a family member and they won't talk to you, for 3 months or something, and you go before them and you say, I'd like to come before you. I'm not sure what has transcribed here, what has gone on. I apologize if I have offended you in any way. Will you please help me understand what you need from me so we can move forward? Well, when that person says, you disregarded me on my birthday, or you didn't attend this thing that was really important to me and it crushed me, we can own that and say, I hear that. I own that. My intent was not hurtful, but I hear I've really let you down. Will you forgive me? It provides a path of freedom to move forward. So it's my belief that, in our operating system, that forgiveness is probably one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful tool in maintaining and having healthy connection and attachment.
Right. It's part of our mental health. Absolutely.
It is. And it's a practice. It's not a rival thing. It's not a two-distraction. It's a practice.
It's a journey. Exactly. Well, thank you so much. Tell our listening family where they can find out more about the organization that gratefully hosts the Clinical Christian.
You betcha. You can find us on meyerclinics.com. You can find these podcasts. You can find other podcasts by Dr. Meyer and other folks on our team there, as well as lots of fruitful information, with our monthly letter and outreach. And I thank you so much, Kristen. I always love doing these shows with you.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meyer Clinics, please visit our website at meyerclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, mhnrnetwork.com.